Hi, hello everyone. Good morning, good afternoon in the different geographical locations that you are. My name is Shlomit Wagman, and I would like to welcome you to our session on AI and the future of privacy. The session is co-hosted by the GETTING-Plurality Research Network, which is part of the Ash Center Allen Lab for Democracy Renovation at the Harvard Kennedy School and the MIT Media Lab Connection Science team. Our goal in this series of workshops is to assist policymakers and students in obtaining the most up-to-date knowledge about the impacts of artificial intelligence on society and democracy in order to improve your ability to shape global public policy. Today, we would like to explore the evolving landscape of privacy in the context of the rapid advancements in generative AI. We will explore how artificial intelligence is reshaping our understanding and expectations of privacy. As the former head of the Israeli Privacy Protection Authority, it's a field of a great interest to me, and I cannot wait to hear our distinguished speakers today. So today, teams of expert speakers include Bruce Schneier, Sarah Roth-Gaudati, and Tobin South, who each will present to us a different perspective on this important topic. Each one of them will be presenting for about 10 minutes, and then we will have 30 minutes of a Q&A part for all the panelists to answer. Please feel free along the session to write down your questions into the chat box along the way, and we'll collect them and present them to the speakers after their talk. We will be recording this session, but people will be almost be able to watch it a little bit later. I would like to hand the floor to my colleague, Robert Mahari from the MIT Media Lab to introduce our speakers. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Shlomit. It's my pleasure to introduce Bruce Schneier as our first speaker. Bruce is an internationally renowned security technologist, often called a security guru by The Economist and others. He's a New York Times bestselling author of 14 books, including A Hacker's Mind, as well as hundreds of articles, essays, and academic papers. His influential newsletter, Cryptogram, and blog, Schneier on Security, are read by over 250,000 people. Schneier is a fellow at the Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society at Harvard University, a lecturer in public policy at the Harvard Kennedy School, and a board member of the Electronic Frontier Foundation and Access Now, and an advisory board member of EPIC and verifiedvoting.org. He's the chief security architecture at Interrupt, Inc. Bruce, the floor is yours.
So thank you. So spying and surveillance are related but different, right? If I hired a private detective to spy on you, would put a bug in your home, tap your phone, listen to what you said, and in the end, I would get a report of all the conversations you had, like what the contents were. If I hired that same private detective to put you under surveillance, I get a different report, where you went, who you talked to, what you purchased, what you did. So before the internet, putting someone under surveillance was expensive. You had to manually follow someone around and noting where they went and what they did and who they talked to. That world is gone, right? Our phones track our locations, credit cards track our purchases, Google and Facebook track everything, right? Computers collect data about what we're doing, and that data is surveillance data. Storing it has become cheap, and everyone is putting us under surveillance, right? What was manual individual became bulk and mass. Surveillance became the business model of the internet, and there's no way to opt out. So spying is different, right? It's always been possible to tap your phone or put a bug in your car, but they still require someone to listen to and make sense of those conversations. So if a spyware company like NSO Group helps the governments hack into people's phones, someone still has to listen to the conversations. Governments like China can censor social media posts based on words and phrases, but that's coarse, that's hard, it's easy to bypass. So spying has always been limited by the need for human labor. And AI is about to change that. And summarization is something that modern generative AI systems do really, really well. Like, give it an hour-long meeting and it'll return a one-page summary of what was said. Ask it to search through 1 million conversations and organize them by topic, it'll do that. Want to know who's talking about what? It'll tell you. Right? Technologies aren't perfect, but they're getting better. So mass surveillance fundamentally changed the nature of surveillance. And because all the data was saved, it allowed people to conduct surveillance backwards in time, right? Without even knowing whom you wanted to target. And tell me what this person did last year. List all the red sedans that drove down this road in the past month. List all the people who purchased these ingredients for a pressure cooker bomb in the past year. Right? So these are all mass surveillance things you can do. And now, as we move into mass spying, it'll change the nature of spying. If all the data is saved, it'll all be searchable and understandable in bulk. So tell me who has talked about a particular topic in the past month and how those discussions have evolved. If person A did something, check if someone told them how to do it. Find everyone plotting a crime or spreading a rumor or planning to attend a protest. And there's more if you really think about it to uncover an organizational structure. Look for someone who gives similar instructions to a group of people and find out who they relay those instructions to. To find people's confidence, who do they tell secrets to? You could track friendships and alliances as they form, as they break in detail. Like in short, you can know everything about everybody is talking about. And this spying is not going to be limited to conversations on our phones or computers. Right? Just as cameras everywhere fuels mass surveillance, microphones everywhere will fuel mass spying. Siri, Alexa, hey, Google, they're already listening, but the conversations just aren't being saved yet. And knowing that you're under constant surveillance changes how people behave. We have a lot of evidence of that. They conform, they self-censor, there are chilling effects. Surveillance facilitates social control, and spying will only make that work. And governments around the world already use mass surveillance. They will engage in mass spying. And corporations will as well. Mass surveillance ushered in the era of personalized advertisements. And mass spying will supercharge that industry. Information about what people are talking about, their moods, their secrets, right? This is all fodder for marketers looking for an edge. The tech monopolies that are currently keeping us all under constant surveillance will not be able to resist collecting this spying data and using it. In the early days of Gmail, Google talked about using people's Gmail content to serve them personal ads. And the company stopped doing that pretty quickly, almost certainly because the keyword data it collected was so poor. Like it wasn't useful for marketing purpose, and it was freaking people out. And that's going to change. And maybe Google won't be the first to spy on its users' conversations, but once the others start, they won't be able to resist. Their true customers, their advertisers, will demand it. So we have to start thinking about this new capability. You know, we allowed mass surveillance because in the years of the internet where we weren't really paying attention and we didn't have any regulation. If we think about data privacy at all, we need to think about mass spying and how that will change the way people think about security. So I'll stop there. Did say I will stop there.
Perfect. Thank you, Bruce. Sorry about that. I thought we would have Q&A right away, but we'll introduce our next speaker and then go through all the speakers and then do Q&A at the end. So next up, I will be introducing Sarah Roth Godet. Sarah is the Executive Director of the digital rights advocacy organization, Fight for the Future. Her diverse background encompasses 25 plus years of supervisory, administrative, campaign product, and tech development, communications, and fundraising experience. She ran the Public Interest Network's fundraising and field canvassing operation, where she raised more than $20 million in grassroots income annually, employing thousands of staff and innovating new technologies for grassroots mobilization. Sarah, it's all yours.
Great. You can hear me okay? All right. And can folks see my screen?
Yep.
Proper to thumb. Okay, perfect. Great. Then I will jump in. Let's see. So yeah, just to quickly elaborate a bit on Fight for the Future. Thank you for having us be part of this panel, and for all the attendees just for being interested in this topic. Fight for the Future, our focus is on technology and the laws that govern it. We're an interdisciplinary collective of artists, technologists, political strategists, and activists. And we combine our expertise to accomplish public policy victories that would have been seen to be impossible, but for the ways in which the tools and amplification that technology afford us. So we've really seen firsthand the double-edged sword of technology. It gives us the power to uplift, gives more people a voice than ever before in our democracy, but it also has the power to oppress people and to perpetuate harms. And this is the intersection where we work, ensuring that technology is primarily a force for good, for empowerment and liberation, not oppression and tyranny. We are probably best well known for large-scale mobilizations, so PIPA and the internet strike, or those that won net neutrality and unleashed massive backlash upon its repeal. We've done everything from organize a nationwide concert tour to oppose the TPP, to crowdfunding billboards calling out politicians for voting against privacy. You can see here, Ted Cruz loved this so much, he put them up on one of his little poster boards during a recent congressional hearing. So moving on, I thought Bruce's overview is just a really great, helpful explainer. AI developments have and will continue to dramatically lower the cost of spying. It will give another big boost to the massive data broker industry, which in turn will continue to incentivize surveillance as a business model, arguably a vicious cycle that we must disrupt. And while tech CEOs and pundits may try to dazzle and confuse us with the highly theoretical discussions of existential risk and self-aware killer robots, that it's not, those aren't necessarily threats, but our work really remains rooted in the many harmful ways that AI is already impacting people's lives. So this is where I wanted to jump in. You can see my background is mostly in running organizations and tech activism. So I wanted to talk quickly about the harms to privacy that are affecting people now, with a few examples, and then some of the ways we're working to address them in terms of activism and campaigns to influence policy. So a few examples that are starting to kind of move towards what Bruce was getting at in terms of mass spying. We have AI-driven insights helping data brokers create more detailed and accurate profiles of individuals, making the data they sell even more valuable. An anti-abortion group was able to specifically target visitors to nearly 600 Planned Parenthood facilities in 48 states with anti-abortion ads using location data from a broker called Near Intelligence. So it's not hard to imagine how this data, easily purchased from data brokers and increasingly more sophisticated, will be weaponized in the future. Another example, of course, AI-based facial recognition technology, and this is where I'll talk most about our activism, but this is software that can instantaneously search databases of faces and compare them to one or multiple faces detected in a scene. Thanks to Joy Buolamwini, which most folks maybe have heard of or know, well, at MIT, she and others studied how this technology is notoriously bad at identifying anyone who is not a pale and cisgendered male person. So we have Portia Woodruff, was 8 months pregnant when the Detroit police mistakenly arrested her for robbery and carjacking based on a faulty facial recognition match. She was held in jail for 11 hours where she started having contractions and had to be taken to the hospital after being released on a $100,000 bond. So there are countless other examples. We have automated license plate readers in our cities, gunshot detection services that analyze microphone data, all of which are affecting people now day to day and growing more and more sophisticated. And then lastly, I just wanted to note that while not necessarily a direct threat to privacy, the lack of regulations and laws protecting our data privacy are what allowed the data to be harvested and the algorithms to be trained. And the algorithms are impacting so many other parts of our lives and our communities, from driving up rents and cost of living, to monitoring low-wage workers on the job, to proctoring tests for an increasing number of students, to biased resume screening, and unfortunately, the list goes on and on. So next, I just wanted to get to what our strategy has been, so as to potentially leave on a bit of a high note. We've been focused on focusing our activism in a dual-pronged way. So stopping the spread of the most abusive technology where it's possible, to buy time for regulatory and legislative change, and to leverage these campaigns to help shift the narrative and build grassroots power, and to build political will, ultimately, to win legislative change. So a few places where we've had success: facial recognition. We were the first group to call for a national ban for law enforcement use. A lot of organizations in DC were pushing back that just wasn't winnable. We should be going for something like transparency. But we built, a page with a full-throated argument and a massive intersectional, first of its kind coalition helping to popularize this position that we needed a full ban and move that forward. We also created a map to track where it was being used, and later, as cities and states started to pass bans, we tracked that too, and we supported those local and state efforts wherever possible, helping to deliver petitions from our campaign groups in Detroit and states like California. And one kind of fun tactic to mention is that, we organized a stunt where we had folks walking around the halls of the Capitol building in DC using Amazon's commercial-grade facial recognition to match a list of members of Congress, Amazon lobbyists, and we threw in celebrities for fun. The software thought it identified, among many other people, Roy Orbison, who, of course, at that point had passed in 1988. And along the way, even though everyone in DC told us it wasn't possible, legislation was introduced to ban facial recognition for law enforcement. So we've seen the way in which these kinds of campaigns can help to kind of build and popularize policy and lead to legislation. We also focused on areas where companies with the tech were looking to expand, where they hadn't yet been put in place, like our airports, unfortunately, but where they were looking sort of for the technology to be a solution for a problem that didn't necessarily exist. A couple of examples of that, where we ran campaigns that got more than 40 major music festivals to commit to not using the technology and kept it off of 60 college and university campuses. And when the IRS announced it would add facial recognition tech made by a company called ID.me to verify taxpayers' identities, we jumped into action. Along with Algorithmic Justice League, we launched a campaign at dumpid.me, garnering press in mainstream outlets and resulting in the IRS eventually walking back their plan. We led a campaign to ban facial recognition use at stores. I'll start to maybe go through these slides a little more quickly so we don't run out of time. But I will say that we had a scorecard, and we were focused on Macy's for some time. We had a major victory when the FTC banned Rite Aid from using facial recognition tech after finding that dozens of people had been wrongfully detained for shoplifting due to misidentifications. And I'll probably skip over Amazon Ring, but they don't. Currently, the devices have long had relationships with local law enforcement. They don't currently use facial recognition, but it's assumed that they probably will add that in at some point. And we had a victory recently where Amazon Ring shuttered their sharing program, their sort of red carpet surveillance program with the local law enforcement. Lots more campaigns, a lot of different cultural inflection points that we harnessed to help stop the spread. A Spotify-focused campaign where they had gotten a patent to use voice recognition software, e-proctoring campaigns. This is an in-person protest at a Phillies game where they're starting to add facial recognition. Again, kind of the solution looking for the problem just for admissions. So hopefully this leaves you with a sense of both a strategy and some hope that we can help stop the spread and mitigate the worst harms while, again, buying time and building political will for legislative change. In terms of policies, there's so much we can talk about, and maybe we'll get into it with the questions, but I'll leave you with one more thought. Really, a privacy-first strategy can cut to the heart of surveillance capitalism and mitigate many of the harms from misinformation, kids and social media, and yes, AI. I'll drop in the chat, but EFF has a great white pager focused on this privacy-first strategy. We have a campaign at dataprivacynow.org that I'll share as well. My contact information here, and then a couple of other organizations to follow if you want to learn more about a lot of the activism that's happening in this space. That's me.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Appreciate it. And so we'll get to our final speaker now, Tobin South. Tobin is a PhD candidate at MIT. He's on a Fulbright scholarship advised by Professor Sandy Pentland, who heads the Human Dynamics Group at the MIT Media Lab, and Connection Science in the Institute for Data Systems and Society. Tobin works at the intersection of data, privacy, AI, and society. In particular, he's focused on building privacy, security, verifiability, and regulatory compliance into the frontier of AI from first principles. Tobin, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Robert. And thank you to the Ash Center. It's always good to talk to everyone down the river while I'm here at the MIT Media Lab. Bruce and Sarah, I really loved your talks. The focus on activism, the focus on really talking about the policy making change. I want to talk today about a little technical, not super technical, talking about what actually is inside of these frontier AI systems, particularly generative AI, and how this maps to regulation that can actually make a difference. And so this is a talk I gave recently at the MIT Media Lab, and is centered around the idea. Can I check, Robert, that you can see this thing?
Yep, we can see them.
The key story here is that over the last 2 years, we have seen a proliferation in capabilities of frontier AI systems, which is exciting in many ways and is likely to continue rolling out across the globe. But if we're serious about leveraging the capabilities of AI in society, we need to be a lot more serious about the privacy and auditability of how these systems are deployed. And I want to give you a technologist's perspective on what this looks like and the role that regulation can play in making sure this happens. So the first thing I want everyone to understand, and I think is a key point that's missed in the discourse, is that AI is not one monolithic magical model. It is not just OpenAI sorcerers creating one model. It's a whole supply chain of processes that lead to you eventually having access to ChatGPT, Claude. Starts from data collection when we're curating all the data, through pre-training, which is the training of AI models on the internet or huge scale amounts of content, often with limited or restrained quality controls on that data, to fine tuning, which is often done on much higher quality data and done for specific purposes like aligning value sets or making sure that AIs give responses that humans like, all the way through to inference, the process of actually being served a model, being accessed it, or retrieval, which is how we pull in relevant information. And I'll talk about the last two more in a bit. But just to understand some of these risks, some you might think of all the time, like the fact that copyrighted data might be in this data collection. But there are many, many other risks, like the fact you can have model backdoors, which are secret attacks in training data that allow users who know that backdoor to access and get around safety features of these models. It can be introduced quite trivially into the internet. There are risks that come with closed-door training of these models. There are alignment jailbreaks to break around safety controls during fine-tuning. You might have heard of prompt injection attacks that are often happening, or model wake leaks that are constantly at risk when you're using third-party services. And broadly, these class of man-in-the-middle attacks, where someone tries to get in between you and your AI to extract information or do something bad with it. There are providers that lie, make up claims that are not true, and many people trying to snoop on the usage of AI systems. So this is less about the harms that AI itself can bring, and more about the challenges and risks that come in how we're building AI systems. So I'm going to go give you some details and show you what this actually looks like for two of those examples, just inference and retrieval. We can talk about the others later as well. Let's talk about this idea of inference, which is just how your model is being served to you, how you're using it. You can think either ChatGPT for usage, or in a more technical sense, using an API endpoint from OpenAI. So this is how applications built on top of these AI models typically use AI. When you use these tools, you have no real way to know what AI model you're actually being served. So as a quick primer, you might have remembered the controversy if you're using ChatGPT, that suddenly after it became really popular, GPT-4 became really popular, it got worse all of a sudden. And these are just some quantified metrics that show that it really did get worse. And this happened because behind the scenes, OpenAI realized they were running out of GPUs and had to move to a slightly cheaper, more efficient model at the cost of user experience. As users, we have no idea what is going on behind the scenes. And this might be fine if it's someone doing their homework that they shouldn't be doing on ChatGPT. But if we have AI systems increasingly embedded in organizations, God forbid, governments, you really want to know what's going on under the hood. This is especially true in any kind of context where regulation mandates that you have the right model, especially any kind of medical model using AI. And so just to highlight a piece of research that seeks to address this, we have some brand new work on actually verifying what model is being used. From a technical perspective, this uses zero-knowledge cryptographic guarantees that allows you to check properties of a model that is actually being served to you, and can be done without ever seeing the weights. So end users don't need to see weights, but they allow you to check the model you're running matches a set of claims that are made, which is critical for real trustworthy audits, which in contexts like GDPR is critical to have audits and continuous risk monitoring that's actually real, and that you don't have rogue vendors swapping out models that you really can't tell the difference between. And just to motivate this, I think this is a very funny. Sarah mentioned the work of Gender Shades by Joy, who is an alumni of the MIT Media Lab. And they had this massive piece of work calling out Microsoft and IBM and other tech companies for racial bias in facial recognition, right? So like facial recognition software worked really well on pale males and poorly on essentially everyone else. And this stems from both having racist models, but also that companies can just make a claim about the models they're serving you, and it can turn out not to be true. We saw this just the other day with Google and Gemini. They put out claims about the performance of Gemini to show it was better than GPT-4, when it was in fact not better on those metrics. They had fudged around the metrics a little bit. This research is an example of deep technology that allows you to hold these companies to account by checking that their claims that they make match the actual usage of their models. And just an example of a technology that works here. To turn to a different technology, let's highlight this idea of retrieval. So the last thing was inference, how you actually serve an AI system. Now let's talk about accessing third-party information. So you might have heard of retrieval augmented generation, or RAG, which is the way that most organizations are deploying AI systems. I haven't warmed up this morning. And what it means is you use an external database to pull in contextual, relevant, and timely information, which can allow you to update your usage of the AI model. So think in a medical context, you might want to, you have a patient query, you need to access real-time medical updates. This is very common in a patient context, in a medical context. You will search an external database of up-to-date clinical outcomes and pull that information in for usage with a generative AI model. This ChatGPT can do this natively with your own PDFs. You can use Copilot from Microsoft, but there's also lots of third-party services that will do this and organizations implementing this themselves. And it's very common. This is a good example of a design that's interesting because it's both auditable in that you know what examples went into a generation, and updatable because you can change that database. This is interesting in that it gets around the cost of training the model, right? So instead of having to constantly train the model to update information, you don't have to go through that process. You can just change the database. And you treat the language model here not as a knowledge engine, not as this magical AI that knows everything, but as a grammar processing engine. You pull in real contextual information in the form of relevant examples. And you use the AI to kind of read them and then rewrite a response or edit some text file forms, which tends to be a much more reliable, less hallucination prone, robust and audible approach to deploying AI, which is just good to note if anyone's out there thinking of building these things, God forbid. But there is a real risk that comes with this, which is anytime you're using other external services like databases, you leak any information about your language model usage to those external databases. So another quick technical example is a piece of research that came out of the lab on private retrieval augmented generation, which, to go through quickly, allowed multiple servers, multiple databases of information to come together in an encrypted format. Put all this information together, keep it fully secure, make it searchable, and then plug this into language models. And this is an example of technology that through some careful design, allows you to mitigate some of the privacy risks involved in using a consumer chat-based AI system. And I think it's a good example of how technologists, researchers around the greater Boston area and around the world can design targeted privacy interventions to improve the guarantees around how we actually use these tools. So those were just two examples, inference and retrieval, where there are real risks that come from deploying AI systems, but that we can design technology, not just policy, but technology to solve some of those risks. And there are many other examples across this supply chain of AI, from, you might have ever heard of differential privacy or generally quality controls over data collection. A major project that's going on here is the Data Provenance Initiative, which has been monitoring the copyright status, legality, robots.txt information of a huge swath of pre-training and fine-tuning data. We have a significant portion of the internet accessed. I actually am the fund owner of the whole internet. I've downloaded it onto my server, which has taken a fair bit of time, but allows us to go through and annotate parts of that internet to actually know what's going on in this pre-training data. There are examples of transparency obligations for large companies doing pre-training. This does not mean we need to have every company releasing all of their weights open source. That comes with its own risks. And there is commercial incentives not to open source things. But you can create some obligations for these companies to talk about what's going into their models, the general properties or policies they're having around their model training, and really, create requirements for them to let the public know what's going on as these systems proliferate and change the world in many ways. And then there's simpler stuff, tools that we've been using for a long time, like encryption on usage. There are light versions of this and heavy versions of this, but something that I expect we will see roll out more and more over time. And then protections on the data that's both being accessed and used, user data. Should ChatGPT be able to train on your usage of ChatGPT, especially when, frankly, I ask a lot of sensitive questions to my Claude and my ChatGPT. Maybe I should be concerned about that. So to bring this all together, some thoughts on the role of regulation in this is that the sole responsibility when it comes to AI is not just OpenAI. There is a whole supply chain and you need accountability across it. And in many sense, when you have companies buying data from other companies and buying models and passing them through, whoever is best positioned to address the risks needs to be the person accountable for the harms associated with failures to address those risks in the supply chain. And this requires some careful regulation. We can't just be targeting Google and OpenAI. We need to target everyone else in the supply chain as well to make sure we're more careful. But it's worth noting in doing this that much like many other technology solutions like messaging or HTML, we will find end-to-end encryption approaches. Technologists are great at finding solutions. We will eventually converge to these goals. But to motivate that and incentivize that and speed that up, which I think is really critical, we're going to need sensible frameworks to actually make this come into practice. So if you're curious about more, we have a big write-up. The president of MIT has invited us to get together a bunch of cryptographers from across MIT and Harvard and write a big piece on end-to-end privacy and security for generative AI aimed at a public audience to kind of highlight these opportunities and risks. And would love to chat more.
Thank you very much, Tobin. So now we'll transition to a Q&A. So if the speakers want to turn their cameras on, and I think so what the first question that was asked in the chat, and feel free for all the participants to put more questions in the chat, was about kind of basic legal frameworks and training citizens on their rights and how to be cautious. So I don't think we covered that point explicitly, so I wanted to give anyone who was interested in kind of contributing to that, legal frameworks, training citizens, an opportunity to respond.
You might have the wrong group.
All right. We've covered things in this webinar series related more to kind of privacy regulation and AI regulation in the past. So hopefully we can get to this question kind of in a future session. The next question was specifically for Bruce. There's a rush toward privacy regulation. Obviously, the US seems to be. Sarah, you're saying you're going to answer this question live? I see what we're doing. Sorry. There's a rush towards privacy regulation. Obviously, the US seems to be slow to adopt these regulations because of the negative impact on businesses. But the emerging class of privacy technologies means that we don't have to choose growth versus privacy. We can have both. This should give people hope. Which movements are you positive about when it comes to addressing security/privacy?
So I'm actually not optimistic that meaningful regulations will not impact business innovation. In fact, any regulation that the businesses like is sort of by definition terrible. That if we actually want to meaningfully limit these technologies and their effects, you have to piss off companies. So this is not something that magic math can solve, because these are really business problems. So, I mean, I get it that regulation will affect innovation, but when technologies can kill you, we do that. We do that in avionics, we do that in pharmaceuticals, and AI is getting to the point where it's going to affect life and property. So we're going to have regulations that will limit the ability of companies to do whatever the hell they want. And I think we should be okay with that. That's not a bad thing. That is a good thing. That is how we as society keep ourselves safe.
Can I second that and in part respond to Lucas Schmuck's question, which is just to reiterate Lucas's question, that some of the things I described are very technical interventions and how regulation can actually address these. I agree. I think we need to have real harms for these companies. Like, the regulation should affect their bottom line. Lots of us around here know the people that work for these big tech companies. They're exceptionally smart. They will find solutions to whatever problems we put them under, and it might slow down innovation. I think this is moving very fast. We could slow it down a little bit. It wouldn't be the end of the world. And I think in the end, a lot of these privacy guarantees, not using AI in certain contexts where it might be profitable, cost the bottom line. Like, it would be more efficient to surveil every employee of your organization, but we should probably decide that that's a bad idea. And that's okay. I think that's the role of regulation, is to create the profit incentive to put in real technical solutions that provide privacy and safety.
Thank you, Tobin. Sarah, do you have anything on this point? Otherwise, I'm happy to move to the next question. We had a participant ask not about the private sector use of AI, but rather the public sector use. So the question goes, what are the actual benefits of data collection in AI to fight terrorism or money laundering or other sophisticated crimes? Are there any real benefits? How do we know that the risks/downsides outweigh the benefits? Even if governments prohibit this, wouldn't bad actors still be able to exploit AI? Can't the proper use of data collection in AI be regulated rather than prevented/prohibited altogether?
I can answer if others don't. I'm a big believer that we should all be using AI, and all these examples are good uses of AI. I just think we need to be sensible about how they're deployed and introduce auditability, know what's actually going on, introduce privacy. Anti-money laundering is a good example where it's critical. We want to use the best tools we can to detect money laundering. I don't want money laundering to happen, but I also don't want a complete surveillance state on our finances. And there are healthy mediums that technology can allow to both do analysis on data without completely leaking all of the information to the government.
And there are legal controls. We have warrant processes. We willingly give the police an enormous amount of authority to peer into our lives, but we have checks and balances. And again, they're not technical. They are procedural. And that is the way society works. So sure, I mean, bad actors will exploit all technologies. That is going to happen. And then it doesn't mean that when we have good uses, we don't limit them, audit them, control them in ways that society thinks is best.
Yeah, I was just going to come back to the idea of a privacy first strategy. Like, if we can and this is what the companies won't like. But if we can, pass a omnibus federal data privacy law in this country that is strong and does, addresses data minimization, then we can, really, I think that's a first start in terms of like the way in which the data that's being harvested has been done so without our consent. And then I think addressing the discriminatory and harmful use cases with regulation is also a key thing versus the technology.
Moving to the final question that we've had, and again, I encourage the attendees, if there are any more questions, feel free to add them. But this was from a practicing clinician who asked, how do we see the safeguards around AI-assisted data brokering being used for insurance, especially healthcare insurance? And the person was especially curious about companies that provide DNA genetic analysis. So any thoughts on that?
One thing I'll say, my partner works on genetic foundation models, taking huge swaths of DNA and trying to train like large AI models that can help drive insights for that. It's very hard. It's very promising. It could be super exciting, but it's really hard. I think consent, like informed consent when you're sharing your DNA, is probably one of the hardest possible things to articulate to an end user. So it needs to be done with great care.
And this is really not an AI question. This is a privacy question. And we're constantly balancing the notion of data in aggregate as valuable to us in aggregate, and data individually is important to us individually. And different data, you get different answers. So we all benefit from the fact that Google Maps has us all under surveillance and gives us good driving directions. And how do you balance out privacy? Well, the data is valuable for 10 minutes. And anonymous, and maybe 1 out of 10 cars. Medical information, you really need all of it. So maybe you control it through the data being in a secure database, and that queries have to be approved, and there's some kind of process of registering what your analysis is. I'm kind of making this stuff up, but we can build protections around sets of data, and they will very much depend on what the data is and how it's used. There won't be one answer. There'll be many answers. Census data is another one. And there are rules about queries to the census. And queries that return only 1 or 2 names have different rules than queries that return millions. So we are actually good at doing this if we decide we want to. And this, again, speaks to regulation, giving us some control over our data and our privacy. We really want the benefits of putting all of our medical data in one big database and letting researchers at it. That'd be enormous, but yikes. So we need to balance those two.
Maybe to broaden this question a little bit, especially in the health insurance context, that's kind of a application of AI that, there's no reason why people would know that their data is being processed in certain ways. So kind of to just broaden this, what kind of strategies do you think exist for us to be able to uncover potentially problematic uses of AI that are kind of happening behind the corporate veil, especially when the input data is not obviously connected, right? Like, using images of people's faces to detect like emotions and things like that. Is there anything there? Are there, regulatory interventions?
Again, it's just like detecting any corporate malfeasance, right? I mean, you have to be able to audit, and you need transparency. And I worry a lot about, particularly insurance. Insurance is an industry that works only because data is limited. I mean, we put ourselves in pools and no one knows who is going to get sick. And the more data there is, the worse that industry is. So there are going to be rules. I mean, there are already rules that you cannot use, racial data. I mean, there are data that is prohibited to be used by the insurance industry by law. Even if it gives them better actuarial information, they are not allowed to use it. So you can imagine rules like that regulating how AI can predict people's health, because we don't want that. And the industry actually doesn't want that, but they will be unable to, because they can't coordinate, not use it. So you're going to need an overall rule. But in general, you uncover corporate malfeasance in the same way we've been doing it for the past few centuries. No difference here.
That makes sense. And I think it's helpful to state that oftentimes like existing safeguards are actually sufficient. We had a different question about whether privacy requirements and probably kind of regulation writ large can end up empowering the companies that already have lots of data, or to extend the question a little bit, that already have the ability to spin up large compliance organizations and crush the smaller players. What are your thoughts on that? Maybe Sarah, you haven't had a chance to, I don't know if this is up your alley, but I'd love to give you a chance to respond.
Yeah, just that it's a very good concern with any regulation that, like, if not, sort of carefully thought through, can tend to entrench some of the biggest players and build more monopoly power. But yeah, so it's a good question.
We can take a page from banking, and banking regulations are key to this in the U.S. The key to the size of the bank. So bigger banks have more regulations. So again, these are problems we can solve. And yes, the big companies want regulations and only they can meet, and the little players can't. But we know we can ratchet things based on the size of a company.
The latest version of the federal data privacy policy just this week, excludes small businesses, for example. So that's common.
We actually had a question about that proposal. I was worried that it would be unfair to ask, but any reactions on kind of this proposal? And is the U.S. taking a big step toward privacy here?
It's been quite a week. We're still analyzing the bill itself. It's positive that there is a new proposed privacy bill on the table, because we think that's ultimately the right direction to be headed in. That the other bills that are trying to sort of regulate the content on the internet with good, respectable goals around protecting kids, but we have a lot of concerns about the ways in which those would suppress content, will not be constitutional. So privacy is the right direction. So that's very positive. But yeah, so far it's got a preemption clause that just doesn't seem like it's just not the right bill for 2024. Let's just say, because states have been moving forward with strong privacy laws, some of them anyway. So yeah, there are some problems with it, but it's a step in the right direction, I would say.
Bruce, Tobin, have you had a chance to look at the bill? If not, yeah.
We rely on people like Sarah to read those bills.
More generally, this wasn't one of the questions that was asked by the participants, but AI and data usage in general is a fairly global thing, and so we are seeing a global patchwork of regulatory approaches. Do you think that we will converge towards some sort of set of global standards? Is that something that we should aspire to? What are your views on that?
We haven't yet in social media and data collection. We've been trying for about a decade and a half, so I wouldn't be optimistic anytime soon. I'm okay with a patchwork. I'm okay with states doing their own thing. I mean, companies like one law, and kind of too bad. I'm sorry. Different countries, different states, different laws. Like, suck it up. So I don't think we need to converge. I'm perfectly happy for there being many laws in different jurisdictions.
But with interoperability, at least, is that a no? Okay.
I mean, you're going to get interoperability, but I think really the lessons about social media and the European data laws and U.S. companies trying every which way not to comply is a really good lesson.
A different question that was asked in the chat was about, I think all three speakers mentioned in some way the idea of third-party audits or someone else kind of coming in and checking. Who should that be? Should that be the regulator? Should that be Ernst & Young? Should that be some new type of entity? And how do we ensure trusted entities doing this? Tobin, why don't you kick us off?
I mean, I think that's an excellent question. There are instances where making it the government might make sense. These really frontier foundation models. There's been this discussion with the big labs, but there's also lessons to be taken from our taxes, where we have accountants and companies have auditors. Sure, maybe there's only 4 big 4 accounting firms, but that's better than having one. And I could see an increasing proliferation in tools and an ecosystem around providing audits and checking on these things. Maybe that's just one take. But we'd love to hear others. What do you think, Robert?
No, I mean, to Bruce's point, it seems like different solutions in different jurisdictions might make sense, right? Yeah, especially in a context where, if we go beyond like Western countries, like there might be just completely different types of solutions that make sense. We had one question prepared that's kind of interesting about youth and data sharing specifically, that many young people are very open about sharing their personal data on social media, maybe under the belief that they have very little to hide. In light of the potential for AI tools to facilitate near universal surveillance, do you anticipate that there'll be a shift among this younger generation? And if not, does that raise an issue?
I'm hoping for one. I feel like I see some signs of it. I have 20-something nephews that are constantly trying to convince my 11-year-old to just never get on social media. And yeah, so I think there is some backlash, hopefully around privacy. I think younger people have always been on the forefront of every social movement, and so I do think that it's critical that they continue to find places to express themselves, and that we recognize their First Amendment rights. But yeah, I'm hopeful.
I think it's interesting. And not just young people. I think most people don't fully understand how the data is collected and used, and that's deliberate. I mean, that's deliberate by Google and Facebook to ensure that people don't fully understand it. People think they have more protection than they have, and are often surprised that they don't. And also, people are on these sites less because they want to and more because they have no choice. And if your social life revolves around a particular social media platform, your friends are way more important than your privacy. And and we all do that. We all give up privacy all the time, because we need to be on certain sites and certain networks. So, I mean, this is, again, a place where people think the government protects them more than it does. So, I mean, I don't look to people suddenly saying, I can abandon my entire, social network, which is now online. I need the government to step up and give people the protections that they actually already think they have.
Tobin is one of these young people.
I'm not that young. I mean, I might be younger than some people in the room. I don't want to make any presumptions. I mean, I very much, I see younger people now being more afraid, and like I think your nephews are excellent role models for your kids. But at some point, teenagers are driven by the social world. Like, if there's 2 things they love to do, it's talk to friends and cheat on assignments with ChatGPT. So, like, the odds that we can really get them to not use social media or not use these, chat-based AI models, I think is going to be increasingly hard, but we'll keep fighting.
So maybe we have 5 minutes left. Maybe each panelist could share, and because this is so fast moving, I feel like you can't pick 50 years or 20 years, but in 5 years' time, what do you really hope that we will have achieved in the context of privacy and AI. And let's go maybe in starting with Tobin. Do you have one? You're nodding along.
Reverse order was not expected. So I think like my 5-year prediction / hope is that we continue to have better and better AI models, focusing on mainly on generative AI, which is where I focus my energy. We will have really effective, capable AI systems that are extremely useful and deployed in enterprises, in everyday life as your phone assistants. I would like Siri to be at least 1,000 times better than it currently is. But at the same time, I really hope companies, especially the ones that touch consumers, have fully thought through privacy. Apple is serious about privacy. It's part of the reason they're slow on AI. And I think they will find a way to put Siri on your phone being incredible, using some language model, without sacrificing immense amounts of privacy. And there's a good example, like there is a middle road, and I'm hoping we can see more companies taking it.
Bruce?
I want us to do better than we did with social media. And the lesson of social media, to me, are the advertising business model led to mass surveillance, led to virality as the coin, which helps with lock-in, keeping people on the platform, which fuels the monopolies. Right? That is the trajectory. And I see the same trajectory with AI. And I would like us to stop it. And the way to stop it is not do what we didn't do. I don't know if I got that right with social media, which is to say, hands off, let the companies figure it out. We know what the companies will do. Government is the mitigating power here, and government needs to step up and look at what the regulatory structure should be that allows these companies to operate. And I want us to do that.
Thank you. And Sarah, the final word.
Yeah. I mean, I think as we back to Bruce's original overview in his piece, like as we see the cost of mass spying get lowered, I think we're going to see, unfortunately, just more examples, more stories of its harm at a time when our, there's a lot at risk. We know how the anti-LGBTQ laws will be enforced. They will be enforced through surveillance and most likely mass spying. And so, yeah, I'm hoping we will see some kind of revolt to that. I think that users hopefully will just demand more for data brokers and for companies to take less. So, and hopefully that and regulations are needed and will follow as there's more political will for that.
Perfect. Well, thank all three of you for being here. Thank you to all the attendees who made time to join us. Shlomit, do we have anything to say to close, or?
Yeah, just first to thank our speakers, and personally I was very inspired and I thought it was a very interesting one. I truly hope that policymakers, regulators, as well as society at large will be able to indeed capture the new challenges and find solutions. As we see, there is a very challenging situation and many global arbitrage between different approach, different technologies that need to be bridged and thought about. And I really like, the younger generation hopefully being and better understanding the environment and changing the perception of privacy once they see how AI is able to do data mining into their data and mass surveillance, as Bruce presented so interestingly. I want to thank all of you for the excellent contribution. It was fascinating, and also to use this opportunity to promote our future series of workshops. We're going to deal in May in the questions around AI and the elections. So stay with us and follow our publications. I would like to thank the speakers and to thank the Ash Center for hosting this event, and to Sarah Hubbard for organizing that. Thank you, everyone, and we're looking forward to seeing you again on our next session. Thank you. Thank you, Bruce, Sarah, Tobin, and Robert.
Thank you all so much. And we'll distribute recording and materials afterwards. So feel free to reach out if you have any questions.